Hey everyone, welcome to the Racers 360 COTA track breakdown. One of the best tracks in the US, amazing facility, very technical, very difficult track. So we're going to talk about how to tackle this track, and we're going to try to make it to where it doesn't matter what type of car you're in. So the actual pure brake zones will change a little bit, but we'll kind of get into that. So let's go ahead, go down to turn one, we'll go full speed, and then start breaking it down slow speed, frame by frame. So turn one, going to be drastically uphill. One of the first things to note is when we're leaving pit lane here, I know we don't talk about this, but it's important here at COTA to know. We're leaving pit lane right here. There's the white line that separates it right there. Turn one is very, very tight, and you can't really open up to the right to set up for the corner out of pit lane. If you're on cold tires, it's really easy just to slide all the way out to the track exit right after the apex, even at really slow speeds. So just be extra aware. Give the extra look for cars coming down the front straightaway. In practice, especially don't risk it. Let them by just because you can't go slow enough. I've seen a lot of incidents here with cars on cold tires that just literally can't go slow enough. And the car are out, going into turn one full speed. Just doesn't give them enough room either. So normally don't talk about that, but it's important here at turn one. So the brake markers that we're looking for are out to the right-hand side over here. Like I said, it really depends on what type of car you're in. Typically for myself around this track, the 100 board is kind of where I want to be getting down to on the brake marker. You can see for the client we were coaching this weekend, we're braking slightly earlier. High horsepower car, 600 horsepower Ferrari challenge car here. So they're braking a little bit earlier. In between this 100, 150 board, it's kind of where we want to be. What I would say here is it's very easy. You can see on this lap that the client starts to crab in towards the corner. One thing that's critical here is as you brake, really keeping those hands straight along the outside of the road here and not crabbing in. It's a blind corner. You want your eyes looking kind of over the hill if possible. But you can see here as we're getting closer, right here, we're just starting to crab in. And where I like to turn in is just before the crest in the road right here. So just before the front of the car starts to crest, that's when I want to be turning in and have a very late apex here so we can get to throttle and get a good run down to turn two. So you can see here we're starting to crab, and that's going to lead to an early apex in this lap. So really, when you're watching a video in between sessions or after the race weekend or getting ready for the next race weekend, make sure you're not crabbing here, keeping all the way to the right side of the road. Right now is when I want to be starting to turn in. And you can see that crabbing is what's going to cause the driver this lap to apex too early. You can see they are apexing what I would say is the start of this orange curve. I would like to see the apex come actually about the end of this orange curve as it starts to fade away. That's where I want to apex this curve so that I can really start to open my hands and apply the throttle here on exit where it drops downhill. The traction is always something that you're going to struggle with out of turn one. It doesn't seem like I have as much grip to really put the throttle down, especially as it drops downhill. So what happens is when you have this early apex, we can see we're not getting the throttle until really just after the apex. I'd really like to get back to throttle right in here. This is my throttle spot right there. It's purely a traditional corner in terms of entry-exit speeds. You need enough entry speed to not overslow, but you don't want to just be not worried about where you get back to throttle. Right here at this exit curve, bam, going to throttle. And look, you can see this early. If you look down here at the steering wheel, you can see that early apex doesn't allow the driver to start opening their hands until all the way out here. Where ideally, if you can have the later apex, you can start to open your hands much earlier and be to full throttle probably by now. So very, very important. All right, go back to full speed here. Set up for turn two. You can use all of the road here. This is perfect right now, but be aggressive in getting back to the left side of the road in turn two. You can see the driver this lap isn't as aggressive as he could be, and because of that, we have about a third of a car, maybe a half car width to our left-hand side. that we're not using, which means the radius of turn 2 is much tighter. It's harder to flow the speed. Turn 2 is one of those corners where some cars will be flat out, and other cars it might be a pretty decent sized lift. So it's not an easy flat out corner. It's downhill. So we really want to get back to the left-hand side of the road. There's plenty of time to use all of the road out of turn 1 and still work it back to the left-hand side of the road for turn 2. Into turn 2, it's a pretty early turn-in. Most downhill corners are going to be an earlier turn-in. And it feels like you have no hope of really getting down to that apex and making the corner, but there's a little bit of compression right in this area, and that's where the majority of the turning really happens. And so you want to be turning in early enough to where you're kind of, getting to the trajectory towards that apex curve when that kind of compression happens. If we're not doing that, we miss the apex very easily here. So another debated point of this corner here is whether or not to use this apex curve. The way I teach it is it really depends. If you have a lot of understeer, getting your right front tire up, not all the way to the grass here, but right around this kind of start of the red will help rotate the car and help get the front end. If you're struggling with oversteer, then I would avoid it. So it really depends on your car, the setup, and some of the sessions, even the weekends themselves. Sometimes I'm on it, sometimes I'm not. It really depends on the setup of the car throughout the weekend. So struggling with understeer here, then get your right side front tire up on it. You can use a little bit more than he did this lap, but give or take is where you want to be. And then you really want to be trying to commit to full throttle by about this point again, if it's not flat for you. So out of this corner here as well, using all of the road, bam, is exactly where we want to be. But then again, work it back to the right-hand side of the road here. Really, you never want your hands straight. You're always kind of one constant arc. And you want to get back to at least mid-road or even 3/4 of the way back to the right. I don't want to be all the way out here. No, but I want to be at least mid-road is almost exactly. So you can see here, we're starting to turn back to the left before we get to the bridge. And as we get to the bridge, we're about 1/3 of a car width off the inside here. And we really want to make sure we are apexing these orange curbs right here. Now, every race series is very different in terms of track limits. If there are no track limits for you at COTA, then I want my left side tires, or even if even with track limit rules, you can potentially have your left side tires on the inside of this orange curb. As I'm filming this video, the last time I was at COTA, they made the curbs much smaller so you could run a whole car over it. So if the curbs are too big, then you want your left side tire as close to it as possible. If you can run your car over it and not worry about track limits, then you want your left side tire on the inside of it. But either way, you want your car up on this curb, getting close to the start of this orange curb, and then holding it left as you go past it. You don't want to now immediately go back to the right. This is where one of the biggest mistakes guys make here is that they go over it and immediately go back to the right. You can see the driver here, perfect, still turning to the left, 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 and now setting up back to the right. Now we can see here in this video, there is no track limits. So bam, look how much room you can use here. The curbs were still small, so you could run your whole car over it. If you are running on a weekend with track limits, or if they change these curbs to where you can no longer run your whole car over it like we're seeing in this video, then we want to hold it to the left even longer and then turn back to the right to where our right front side tire does one of these. It's really important to have your right front side tire get as close to that orange curb as possible without touching it. And then again, like you see here, continue to turn it right just past that curb as well to set up for the final left-hander here. If you can, no problem with track limits, this is where you want to be. Whole car over the orange curb, bam, perfect. And then if there are track limits, you want to hold it slightly more to the right here longer, and then turn back to the left later. You can see again, we're talking about no track limits this weekend. This is the way you want to do things. If there are track limits, just like the previous corner, you want your left front now doing this, as close to that orange curb as possible without touching it, and really trying to commit to full throttle pretty soon after that curb. Alrighty, go full speed for a quick second here. Talk about turn 6. Turn 6, we want to be using all of the road right here, and then I want enough speed to take me away from the apex curve in the middle of this corner and really double apex it. If I can keep my car all the way down the inside throughout the whole corner, I'm overslowing it. So I really want to be full throttle, full throttle, full throttle, just like that. Now I'm starting to lift. I want the car to take me away from the road mid-corner just like this. Right now, I might just tap the brakes just enough to get weight on the front nose so that I can start carving back to the second apex. Ideally, see, our driver's going to miss it this time, but ideally, we're hitting our second apex really as we go under this bridge here and using, I don't need to be all the way down to the grass, but I want my right side tire as much on this curve as possible to really help that front end turn. Almost every car I've ever driven here in any lap, I'm struggling with understeer here. So I use that curve to help get the front to rotate or get the car to rotate to point it for me. The other important thing here is turn 6, I call this almost 6B because for me, it's a double apex corner. I'm going to sacrifice a little bit on exit here, or a lot of it, to set up for turn 7 so I can flow good speed through turn 7. So you can see here, we missed that apex point a little bit, and because of that, we are too focused right now as this driver on keeping to the right-hand side of the road. I want to get to the right-hand side of the road exactly like he is here, but I want to apex slightly earlier, allow the car to be a little bit more free here, maybe about a half car width wider, and that'll have more speed right now, and then really being aggressive back to the right-hand side of the road. Ideally, you get right here, very short brake zone, light brake zone. Turn 7 is an entry speed corner. I don't care where I get back to throttle here. If I only get back to throttle by the time at the exit curve, that's fine. It's 100% entry speed corner. Light dab of the brakes, turn it in before the road really crests, just as you're starting to see that apex curve. And, excuse me, we are apexing this orange curve right here. We really want to get our left side tire as close to it as possible without touching it. And, ideally, I'm still not to throttle at this point. I'm still not to throttle, still not to throttle, still not to throttle. Maybe about here, if I hit things perfectly, I get back to initial throttle. But total entry speed corner, using all of the road here on exit, and then slightly setting up back to the left here for turn 8. I would like to see this driver maybe get it a third of a car width wider, and then delay their turning back to the right slightly later. So you can see here, this driver is going to get his right side tire. Let me get it using red here, on up here. Ideally, we're slightly wider, turning in from slightly later point and crossing over it like this. That's kind of what I want to see my right front do here. But it's really important getting your right side tire up on this red stuff, holding it here. My goal right now is to have as much entry speed as I can, then start to really slow it down about here. Now I really bring it back to the right as far as possible, and I want to be starting to apply throttle as we're coming off this curve. Now, one important note here is if you are using as much of this curve as possible, some cars, this changes car to car. It actually changes weekend to weekend, year to year. There's some weekends where I can have my left side tire on this curve and not have a problem at all. Sometimes it really just affects the car. I mean, it's your loaded side. So if you are struggling with oversteer and the car just feeling really awful, then use slightly less of the curb to where your left side tire is still on the asphalt here. If you can run on this curb, there's not a track limits problem and it doesn't affect your car, do it because it opens the radius for turn 9 here so that you can start really starting to be applying throttle right now. Turn 9 is one of those corners where it's not quite flat out for most cars. Occasionally it will be, maybe for qualifying or in a lower horsepower car. But you can see here, late apex, do what you can to be full throttle through here or as close to full throttle, and then allowing the car to use out all the road here. Perfect, awesome. Turn 10, flat out, work up to it. It's blind, it's hard to see. There's plenty of road out here. You just got to find your rhythm. So work up to being flat out. So turn 11 here. The brake markers are very, very far out to our right-hand side here, and I don't want to be looking that far right when it's a left-hander. So I end up using more of the where the asphalt turns to grass here is my marker, than that 100 board. Ideally, the 100 board is about as late as I've been able to brake. Now, that's more in higher horsepower, 500, 600 horsepower cars. If you have less horsepower, maybe you're braking just past the 100 board. Maybe you're braking slightly earlier where the grass turns, where the concrete turns to grass right here. That's about the range, though. So if you're braking at the 100 board, I like to look for the grass and feel like about where my full car is past the grass, that's about the 100 board. And that'll allow your eyes to be more focused to the left versus looking all the way to the right here. Turn 11, super late turn in, super late apex. Make sure you're not crabbing here either. I see a lot of drivers start to crab their way in early apex and then they can't get the throttle. So hands straight in the brake zone. There's really not a great turn in marker here. And it's just going to be a feel looking for that apex. Really look at how late this apex is here. You're really apexing the last little bit of this orange curve. You want to be close to this curve right here, but I don't actually like to touch it. So left front, really close to that colored white portion right there. Bam, that's where we want to be picking up initial throttle. Not back in here. You can see our driver starts to apply throttle here too early. You're going to start to get understeer, and then they can get back to full throttle early enough, which is vital down this back straightaway. So lay that initial throttle until about this point. And then with that late apex, you can start to unwind the wheel. We can see full throttle, use as much of the road as you're allowed out here. Take a breath, long straightaway here. Be a late brake zone at the end of the back straightaway. Downhill into the next apex as well. So turn 12 is going to be a complicated corner here. So again, brake zone's out to our right. It really depends on what type of car you're driving. I would say for a lot of cars, that 150 board is going to be a great marker to try to get to. In the cars that I'm more used to driving, the higher horsepower GT cars, that's about where we want to brake. Some cars, lower horsepower, you'll be braking later. Even more horsepower, less grip, you might be braking earlier. In that 200 to 150 board range, that's probably a good place. Maybe starting slightly earlier, working your way up to it. So turn 12, you really want to get most of your brake zone done pretty early because it really starts to drop downhill right about here. It's hard to tell in the video, but right here, we're really dropping downhill. And that means we're going to have an earlier turn-in point because that downhill is going to cause understeer. So if you turn it too late, you have to overslow to make the apex. And there's actually a lot of room here on exits. So you can see early turn-in, and it's decently early apex. We're really apexing kind of the first part of this orange curve right here because we have so much room. So right there at the apex, that's where we want to pick up initial throttle, using as much road on exit as possible, maybe even a little bit more. You have to really be aggressive, working it back to the left-hand side of the road here. Set for 13. You'll probably be braking in a diagonal line to the outside, but as you can see, you have plenty of time to get back to the left-hand side of the road. Turn 13 Turn 13 and turn 15 are probably the worst corners in all of U.S. motorsport tracks. They are tight, rinky-dink. There's never any grip here in turn 13. If you're in a lower horsepower car, you may drive this very differently than a high horsepower car. In the high horsepower cars, we want to treat this as an entry speed corner, trail braking all the way down this apex, and I don't really care about getting back to throttle until all the way out to this exit curve because it's a traditional double apex. And if you get the throttle here, you don't have the grip to be able to commit to full throttle. Continue to turn it right back to the second apex because you'll lose the rear. In a lower horsepower car, you could probably commit to throttle here, be full throttle by about this point, and be able to continue to turn no problem. But in those higher horsepower cars like this one, you can see no throttle, no throttle, no throttle, no throttle, out to the apex, exit curve, excuse me. Now we really start to apply throttle, and now we've got the rotation in the car and the setup of the car to be able to try to get back to full throttle and keep this line where you couldn't do that with an earlier throttle spot. So ideally, in qualifying, you may use this curve. I like to stay off this curve, right side tire right here. No need to use it. The other thing is I like to be slightly wider here. Not all the way out, more like a half car width off of this curve. And then what that allows me to do is have a line that looks slightly more like this coming in versus where our driver looks more like this right here. So it kind of starts to load that outside tire, and then you can slowly start to progressively turn it in for, you know, the second part of 15 here, where if you're braking like this, you have a much harder turn back there. So I like to be slightly wider here and then turning it back in, still, you know, I would almost say apexing this point here. You don't use all of the road here. You want to be about this point, about mid-road, before turning it back into the left here. And it's a pretty early apex point as well here. I like to apex the start of this orange curve. You can see, I think we apex too late here, and we're pretty good throttle position. But I like to apex the start of this curve here. But, you know, it really depends on the cars. Higher horsepower cars, again, maybe slightly later. Really depends. And then getting back to throttle, I promise no matter what you do here, it's probably going to feel slow. You're going to feel terrible through there, but it's just a very, very slow corner. All about the exit point here, but you can definitely give up too much time on entry, and you can open the door to being overtaken there. So it's a spot where it really invites people to, you know, really aggressively dive bomb there, because you open up, you're kind of braking. It's not a late break, so just beware. Someone might be trying to dive bomb you there. You can really kind of send the note by breaking down the inside, forcing them around the outside. They're not going to overtake you on the outside of 15. So just something to take a note of and be aware of. Now into the triple apex right. I would like to see you get back all the way to the left-hand side of the road. We don't do a good job of that. Here you can see a little bit more road out to our left. Work it hard, and then turn it in before the bridge. And you can see, similar to the S's, we're pretty close to this apex curb as we go into the bridge, but not there. About a half car width off. And I want enough speed to where I can't apex. I'm not quite full throttle on the bridge in this car, but close to it. Still some throttle. And I want to be really apexing. The first apex is here. Bam. That's where I want to apex. Using all of the road in between. You can notice it's close all the way around, but not quite full apex. And then using all of the road here in the middle to set up for the second apex and turning it back in. And this is a long apex that I like to hold close to this curve, close to this curve, close to this curve. Occasionally there's a big bump here. If that upsets your car, maybe run a car width off of this apex curve, and then it's less affected. But if your car doesn't seem to be affected by the big bump here, run all the way here. And right now, all I'm trying to do is have enough entry speed to where I'm at the limit of the front end. And then at this point, I'm looking, my eyes are looking far enough forward, and I'm just trying to say, what point can I commit to full throttle, open my hands, and use all of the track here on exit? So you can see, bam, exactly where I want to be, trying to commit to full throttle as early as possible. Now, turn 19, I find the trickiest corner on this racetrack. It just seems like there's less grip here than anywhere else on the track. So I want to use all of the road here out of 18, work it back to the right side of the road. You'll be braking diagonally to the outside of the road here. You may get all the way out here. Most of the time I don't. If I get back out here, I probably overslowed 18. So if your right side tires are about, you know, half a car width, that's off the right side of the road, that's fine. It's a pretty early turn in back into 19. We're turning too late here. If you can turn in this late and still make the apex, you're overslowed. So way overslowed. You can see how early we're out of throttle here, and we're apexing way too late. We need an earlier turn in, and I actually want to have an early apex here. So much road here on exit. I want to be apexing the start of this orange curve, so I'm coming in from a much shallower angle here and holding it. Now, a slight little trick here is, if this curve is still the same, usually low, you can actually hold your left side tires on the inside of it and still be kind of within track limits. So if you can do that, if you have a car with higher ride height, I would say try it one lap, maybe be a little bit on throttle just to help get the front end a little bit raised up. But if you can run on the inside of this orange curve even, you can roll a lot more apex speed. If not, you still want to be apex in the start of this orange curve. Really important to get down to this apex curve, use this apex curve, and then you want that early apex so you can flow the entry speed, and then using this road out here. You don't need a late apex at all here. So early apex, using this road on exit. Turn 20, kind of my brake marker typically is this axis road, the start of this axis road right here. Again, it'll depend a lot on how much horsepower you've got, how much grip you've got, track conditions. So I don't like to talk much about where specifically to brake, but that's a guideline of where we want to brake. Turn 20 is uphill, so you can actually roll more entry speed than you think. It is a pure exit speed corner, but you can roll decent amount of entry speed. So uphill, you want an early-ish turn in, perfect right here. My goal is to apex the start of this orange curve right here. This is where I want to be applying initial throttle. And then your eyes are, of course, looking far forward, and you want to open your hands as early as possible so that you can get back to full throttle as early as possible. You can see what happens for this driver. I think he has slightly too much entry speed this lap, and let's see, where do we pick up throttle? We're way, 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 way too early to throttle here. This is where we pick up initial throttle. So he's going to create even more understeer. And you can see throttle, throttle, throttle. He's going to actually come off throttle, which we never want to see. Pick back up the throttle. Because that initial throttle came way too early, we're only getting the full throttle way out here. Be patient to initial throttle here. Roll good entry speed. Trail brake all the way down to that orange curve. So I'm trail braking off initial throttle. If you get that right, you'll have the rotation. You're back to full throttle by about here, and you're getting a much better run all the way onto the front straightaway here. That's been the Racers 360 COTA track breakdown. If you want us to go look through your video and give professional coaching based on your driving, then go check out racers360.com or One Lap Analysis, just 99 bucks. Send us your video. We'll have a professional coach go through it using this software. We can annotate on it. We'll have voiceover, talk through what you're doing wrong, how you can improve, send it back to you within 48 hours. It is the best bang for buck coaching service out there, and we only work with the very best coaches in the business. So don't pay thousands of dollars a day. Just pay $100 per lap, and we'll go through it and give you personal coaching advice. That's been the COTA track breakdown. Check out racers360.com.